Kind of get started. So cool. So that's kind of like the context. The big picture around this is Latinos for Education, which is a national nonprofit that really focuses on really building the Latino pipeline of educators and people who work in education. So to help Latinos who work in education, like advance their careers. Historically, you kind of stay kind of pigeonholed in an environment. So they're kind of like created a platform that's almost like a LinkedIn targeting Latinos in education. And that platform is called Ed Centro. So they brought on some regional captains, and I'm the Miami or South Florida regional captain. Just been working with them for the past like 3-4 years. They've hosted a pitch competition in EdTech. They've done a lot of like professional development. They focus on also like just networking in the country, getting Latinos who work in education in that big umbrella, collaborating and communicating. So the goal of today's conversation is really just to have a dialogue about those two worlds, like being a Latino, identifying as Latino, Latina, Latinx, whatever is your preferred term, and how you see yourself fitting in the computer science, this big umbrella that's computer science. And Beatriz, I'm going to share the story of earlier today because I think it's a good one that really hits on like the premise of today. So again, we're recording this. We do have some guests who joined us, and Josue is here, Victor's here, who's seen maybe the other Victor Casas, who's seen some of the marketing that we put, just light marketing on our Instagram. So today the framework is going to be past, present, future, and we're going to kick things off. The first question is getting you to think about your past, and I'm going to ask each of you to share who you are, what you do, but I want you to dig in a little bit, and I want you to think about your past. It could be around identity of Latino or not, and how that has somewhat impacted who you are today. And I'll model it. I'll go first. I'm putting you guys on the spot with these deep questions. I know you want to go pour your bourbon or your Bacardi or whatever you need to pour. I got my wine here. But so Carlos Vasquez, right? I grew up in New York City, New Rican in the Bronx, Puerto Rican and Dominican. That's my background, how I grew up. And for me, I was in the public school system in the Bronx, and I saw, we didn't have a lot of resources. I saw that, and I talked to some teachers about that today. Like the environment that I was in pretty much created the self-worth and the value that you have. So like in a public school environment, if you are in a school that has access to resources and the nice gym and the nice locker room, you kind of feel like, wow, like you feel well taken care of. I didn't have that experience, so a lot of what I felt was like I was put into a situation where I knew I needed to kind of make it and get out of that situation by working hard. So like what I do now in training teachers is to remind them that they could still inspire their students no matter what the conditions around them are. So that's me, that's Miami at Tech. And I also have a day job where I work for Hotwire Communications, which is an ISP, pretty much running the nonprofit that they have. So that's me, and I'll do a popcorn style. So whoever wants to go next, free to go.
Popcorn style, I don't think I've ever heard that, but sure, I'll go next. I'll go next because I'm afraid somebody's going to have a really good story, then I'm not going to want to have to go after them. So I'm just going to knock out my boring story now. Also born in the Bronx, also Puerto Rican, but I went to school primarily here in Miami. I'm based in Miami now, and my relationship with, so also like being, I don't know the ages of people here, but maybe the elder, maybe the elder of the group. When I went to school, we didn't really have computers, especially not in the school that I went to. It was not a very well-funded school either. So the access to I know a lot of what we talk about too is like the computer access to computers and that type of education, which now is ubiquitous, obviously. But in high school, like I think I had one class where we used some old computers and learned some, whatever, like, I don't even remember the name of the programming language that we learned, because I was like, oh, this computer thing is kind of interesting. And I remember there were a couple of teachers that had a particular impact on kind of the directions that I took. And I'm not sure so much that it related to my being Hispanic, although growing up in South Florida, you know, we're definitely not a minority here, right? Like much of the population here is Hispanic, so a lot of that is kind of brought up. But I went to college a little bit north, just a tiny bit north in Fort Lauderdale, which is a slightly different audience. And you know, different things teachers told me along the way had different impacts. But I remember in college, the big conversation, actually it was probably a little conversation, this teacher doesn't even remember, but we had asked, somebody in the class had asked, like, you know, I went to art school, and the question was like, what's the deal with like graphic design or computers, or why are we learning fine art? And he said, there's two types of artists in this room. There's artists who like their name on the art, and they become painters and sculptors and fine artists. And then there's artists who like their name on the check, and they become graphic designers. So from that point, I kind of focused on, okay, how do I use like graphic design, which of course then is very computer intensive, you know, especially we were moving to that at the time, and make that part of what I was doing moving forward. And of course, lots of inspiration there, where I had lots of teachers that they were like, okay, if you know what you want to do, connect with this person, connect with that person. And I think a lot of times just having the desire to ask, I would say probably the biggest thing that I struggled with in my teens and my 20s, which does stem from, I think, some of Latino culture, is not wanting to ask for help. Like I felt like, oh, if I'm going to be like, especially like growing up, it's like, oh, I'm going to be self-made and I'm going to do it myself and I'm going to learn how to do it myself and I don't need help from anybody. But that robbed me from like getting the help, getting the advice and the mentorship that I probably could have gotten earlier. So I know, like looking back, I missed out on a lot of opportunities because I think teachers weren't really pushing necessarily to like break through. And I was so like hardened in my thing of like, oh, I can do this myself and I don't need help. But the ones that did push through and did kind of like stick around and offer some additional help and find ways to connect really had an impact, I think, because then I would feel safe to ask the questions, you know? So that's kind of a little bit of my path. And then ultimately became an entrepreneur. I've had a couple of companies, sold my last one in 2016. And now I run an accelerator where we help early stage founders. And that's actually one of the biggest things like we talk through is we're not focused on minority or even like diversity per se, but we are focused on accessibility. So anybody can join our accelerator. It's not like a, you know, Y Combinator, only like 2% of applicants get in. And opening that accessibility, but making people aware like, hey, part of what you're doing here is learning to connect and learning to network and learning to build those relationships that do end up driving success and driving opportunity for you. And I think a lot of that stems from those early interactions with educators that did sort of push through the boundaries that people put up, you know, especially kids. And especially, I think, you know, coming from like that machismo mentality of like, oh, I'm going to do it myself and I don't need help. You got to learn to let that go. And somebody, you know, hopefully teaches you that along the way.
Heather, you pick who goes next, actually, just in case the popcorn kernels don't pop.
I'm gonna pick Beatrice because she's there.
Because she's there, everyone's here. Well, I think mentorship, it's so underrated and so needed, especially in communities that need networks to actually thrive. So kudos to you in identifying those. Well, I'm Beatriz Ayala. I am a Latina from Puerto Rico. And I had my first identity crisis when I went to college. So for me, I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm Puerto Rican, right? Yes, we have an American passport, but for me, like, I didn't really connect with the American culture. I connected with the Puerto Rican culture because there's clearly a sea, an Atlantic Ocean separating the two of us. For me, Puerto Rico was never about a distinction in racism, but a distinction in class, no? And 90% of Puerto Ricans are white. So like, to me, I was very normal within the realms of where I lived. And I remember applying for, and I had traveled the US playing volleyball my entire life. So I had been exposed to different states and different neighborhoods and different types of people all throughout my lifetime. And I grew up in the internet boom and the computer era, right? Like I grew up, I was born in 1989, and then by the age of 8, there was already a dial-up in my home with a home computer, and ICQ was being born, and you could hear that popping in my parents' bedroom when we were chatting and all that stuff. So I grew up with it. I remember the first time they installed computers at my school, and you could only use them in the library space of the school for you to like start Googling stuff even before Google became a thing. So for me, growing up with that, it was very normal. And it wasn't hard to learn. Like I remember kids playing outside, but I was always on the computer curating music. And I remember burning CDs and burning tapes just because that was the way of me expressing appreciation for other people. So I sort of like started learning how to use a computer in a different way, not necessarily for coding or stuff like that, but in a creative way to express my passions. And then I applied to college, and I, was recruited to play volleyball in college. And I remember a lot of conversation around me about, yeah, because she's a minority, she's going to have a better chance of getting into this college, or because she's a minority, she's going to get a better chance of getting into this college. And I remember having a lot of like confusion around the fact of, what do you mean I wasn't a minority in Puerto Rico and now I'm going somewhere where I'm going to become a minority? Isn't that going to trump the opportunities that I'm going to get? Isn't that going to trump the types of people I'm going to have access to? And I remember entering college and having that internal dialogue of, do I hide now that I'm Latina? And because I'm white, I'm going to take advantage of that privilege and use it to my advantage to get doors open for me when I'm coming from a place that's considered a minority. So you start having this like larger than life questions at age 18, when your parents have never sat down with you to discuss what are the implications of this. And I wanted to sort of like talk about the identity aspect of it, because as Latinos, our identity is highly tied to who we are and how we work and the type of service that we want to put in the world. So it became a thing of me trying to hide that I'm a Latina, or I would use it in certain times where I thought it was appropriate because it would get me doors open, and then I would hide it because I knew that it would get me other doors open. So it became a thing I would use for me to get ahead, which is not really that pretty. And it plays with yourself. And then I remember taking a computer science course at Villanova, where I went to school, and I just remember hating it, like coding and trying to create. I was suffering through it. I'm like, why did I end up taking this course, which takes us to the grand story that Carlos wants to tell, which is, I see Pedro's post yesterday about this panel and about your journey in computer science, and I call Carlos and leave him a voice note being like, Carlos, I'm all about being in the panel and talking about my background, but I've never worked in computer science in my life. Like, my co-founder is here, he's a computer scientist, I'll bring him in. And he's like, that's exactly what we need to talk about in this panel. We need to humanize and simplify what computer science means. And it's not only coding, it's design, it's strategy, it's combining all of those things you want to create the future of whatever it is that we want the world to look like. So that's me in a nutshell.
You stole the thunder of the story. You stole the thunder of the story. No,
sorry, but I was
that was a
proud
great
of this
recap.
being Puerto Rican. Like proud of being Puerto Rican, and then confused by being Puerto Rican and wanting to hide it, to entering the workforce in New York City in advertising and marketing and leading Hispanic markets campaigns and brands, and having to leverage that as a powerful tool. And now it's like, I am a Latina, loud and proud. And everything that we want to bring to the table is amplify that culture and amplify the fact that we're the future of America, and that by 2060 we're going to be the largest population in the US. And those are like, we're creating culture, and we're going to be shaping the culture of this continent, right? Of the Americas. So we need to take responsibility for that. And for that, we need to sort of like simplify and humanize some of the roles and titles that exist today that Latinos don't have access to because they think they're not worthy of them or because they don't even know them. And that's what we're doing with Musicasa, right? I'm the co-founder and CEO of Musicasa, and our whole purpose in life is to build a human connections company where people can thrive and can expose their art through community, technology, and data. And that's my story in a nutshell.
You get to pick who goes next. Two great segues either way, whoever you pick.
Let's go with Ariel because I know he's Puerto Rican.
I was gonna say
a lot about him.
Ricans out. We're getting all the Puerto Ricans out first, right?
We should rebrand this the Puerto Rican panel. I don't know where Victor. It should be a Puerto Rican. Where are you from, Victor?
Venezuela.
Oh, it's okay.
El rompegrupo.
We have love for the Venezuelans. So listen, I was thinking about what to share, and at first I was like, I don't know that I have anything interesting, but the more you guys spoke, the more a lot of the themes resonated. So I think we have, a lot in common, Beatriz, about our identity as Puerto Ricans and our love for our island. I grew up in a household where both parents were educators, right? So that certainly played a big role in me choosing a career many years down the line in education technology, right? So that was a big thing. But then also it was about leaving the island and exporting our talents and putting our flag up there in opportunities where it hasn't been done before, right? So I'm happy to talk more later about the present and the future, right? But that's been a big theme for me in my life. I think, I've been the first person to do certain things in environments that typically Puerto Ricans can't really participate or not active, right? So that's been a big motivator for me in the past 8 years of being a technology education school, right? Very much in the same crew of not a technical CS person, right? So can speak about the business side, right, and the marketing side of technology. But to keep it short in the beginning, I'd say those are two big themes. And then for me, it's about how do we incorporate more folks in the conversation, right? So that they're not the only Puerto Rican or they're not the only Venezuelan, launching a company or raising capital from certain type of investor, right? And I really relish that challenge, right, of opening doors. It's a challenge, right, but it can also be a tremendous opportunity, right? And if I think of many of our business successes and personal successes, I think I can point back to the benefit of being Puerto Rican, right? There's other folks that are going to look down on it, where they have their biases, they close doors, right? That's not okay, right? And I don't want to deal with these people, right? But I think for the most part, my diverse background, right, in the country, the island where I come from, and my values and in the way that I was brought up has been a tremendous asset, right? In doing things in a different way, in speaking to consumers in a different way, in therefore getting business, getting opportunities, and gaining market share, right? So it can be challenging at times, but it can be a tremendous opportunity to tap into, right? But I'd say those three things for now.
And last but not least, Victor.
Cool. So I have a little bit of a different background. I went to school for CS, for computer science, and then right now I work as a senior software engineer at a software company called Noom. Before that, I was at Amazon Web Services. Before that, I was at a startup called TripleByte, and before that, I met you then, Ariel. I was a lead instructor of a local coding bootcamp in South Florida. I don't know if you remember me from that, but so that's like the past 8 or so years, and I'm 38. and it took that long for my career to really get started. And I think that a lot of that is in part due to the cultural difference. So I actually grew up in Venezuela. I went to high school there, elementary school, and everything. And one of the ways that kind of like that affected me was going into college. So in Venezuela, you just have like one curriculum, right? Like everybody just goes to high school for the same thing. And, you know, you take your standardized test, which I did pretty well at. So I got into a good college. And in that college, everybody was like already like 9, 10, 11, 13 classes in. So they were kind of like coasting, you know, because of AP, you know, and advanced placement and dual enrollment and stuff. They were like 13 classes in. The first couple of semesters, they were kind of like coasting, and they were able to kind of like, you know, get the whole I'm a college by myself type of thing out of their system. And then they started to apply themselves, and I didn't have any of that, right? Like, they sometimes a lot of them would take, you know, calculus 1, calculus 2, calculus 3, and like walk all over it, and it was like so easy for them, like, you know, like doing like 4th grade algebra because they had already done it. And I'm here like, oh my god, like studying my butt off to get a C+. And that was like a huge kind of like just hit to my ego. Carlos, you're muted. You saying something?
Yeah, I was just saying, like a reality check for you, like in your
Huge reality check, and
system.
just a shock, you know, like I was like, oh my god, am I just like super dumb, or like, you know? And then when your like ego is bruised that way, you start seeing stuff everywhere, even if it's not there. Like in hindsight, I don't know that it was there, but like I would see things, I would get upset by things like, you know, somebody would try to speak to me in broken Spanish, and I'd be like, yo, I speak English. Why are you speaking to me in broken Spanish? I know that, like, you know, coming into the States, I actually spoken much better than understood it because I didn't have the practice at understanding. And I was insecure about that. So I started like feeling those things everywhere, even though I'm sure that, like, a lot of times they weren't there. And, you know, when I would mispronounce a word, and, you know, people like, it's apparently somehow it's very difficult for you pronounce a word like accessory, you say it accessory, because in Spanish it's accesorio. I would say accessory, and like nobody understands it. And I'm like, a bunch of times until somebody like at a store finally taught me the correct way to say it. And you know, I would just get like upset at these things, and so, you know, struggle a little bit. And I also didn't have so the other thing was that I came from Venezuela, right? And in Venezuela, the economy was still in that place where you basically just like the assembly line thing. You go to college and you do what you're supposed to do, and you have a job at a big company locally, and you're good to go, right? That shift, it doesn't work like that at all anymore in anywhere, really, right? And that shift was already starting to happen here. Like in here, you had to hustle a little bit. You had to get internships. You had to like network and stuff to get out of college and land on your feet. You had to do more than just go to class and pass the classes, right? And I didn't have that, you know. I didn't have any kind of like, and I didn't have any kind of support system, or like nobody knew that in my family, because we were brand new. So that was the other thing, like the job markets were in such different places that what I thought was going to be enough just wasn't enough. So like after college, I did a bunch of stuff. Like I did life insurance sales. I became a stockbroker. I became, you know, a teacher for a little while, network admin. So I did a bunch of career changes before finally being able to work my way into software, and, you know, which is what I truly love to do. Every job that I've had over the past like 7 years has been better than the last. And I thought that, like, you know, having the perfect job, I get a new one and it's even better. And it's been an awesome, you know, it's been an awesome journey to get into this field. But yeah, it was difficult. It wasn't easy. So it's a little bit about my journey as a Latino.
Thanks for sharing. And if you can't tell already, like this was a part of a master plan of forming the Avengers and having the dialogue around computer science and the different aspects. So this next question, as we look at the present, first of all, let me just reflect a little bit on what you all shared, because what you all shared with your past are some of the key pillars that, like, as a country, we're trying to address with, like, you know, different initiatives and funding around issues of identity, issues of resources, issues of, if we think about women in STEM and CS, and I'm going to use that story in a little bit. Don't worry, Beatrice, we're going to go back to that one. But I want to ask you all, without cheating, without Googling, I want you all just think about in a 1 or 2 sentences, if I asked you to tell me or to define what is computer science, what would you say it is? Like, just don't look at anything, what comes to mind? Pedro, I'm gonna start with you because you started. What if I said, hey, Pedro, what is computer science? What would you say?
Getting punished for offering a third course. I would say computer science is, geez, that's a tough one. I mean, I know, because I know you, that it's not just programming, not just learning programming. That's as much as I know, that it's not just learning programming.
Mm-hmm.
That's
so
all.
that's we can start with that. We can start with eliminating. Okay, so it's not just about programming. Okay, and then let's go to Vic. I'm curious to hear, Victor, what would you say? How would you define computer science? You got a little bit more insight on that.
You could get like, you could go two ways with this, right? You could be super academic and just say it's like the study of data structures, algorithms, and computational methods, or the way that I would like to take it is it's everything. Every single thing is computer science. Like nowadays, your car is computer science. Your elevator is computer science. You open up your phone, you look at each little icon, right? It has a company behind it with like 200 to 20,000 engineers that make that software possible. So it's basically what runs the world essentially.
All right. So we went existential with it. I like it. All right. Ariel, what about you? Because we're going to end with
I would say it's the application of technology to make our lives better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so Beatriz shared the story of where like she messaged me on WhatsApp earlier. It's like, Carlos, this is not for me. I think you got the wrong person. I'll get you the CTO. And I was like, no, this is exactly why we need to have this conversation. Like, because we need to demystify it. And unfortunately in education, even, okay, you get to high school, tracks are a little bit more clear. Before high school, when you talk about middle school and like, elementary school, they're not so clear. It's a little bit less, tracky and more theory and stuff like that. What happens is we start losing young people before they even get a chance to choose the track in high school because of that intimidation factor. And if you don't know, Miami-Dade, fourth largest school district, we have about, almost 400,000 students here. Around 60 to 70% identify as Hispanic, Latino. So our teachers actually mirror that. Our teachers mirror the population of the students, which is unlike really any other district in the country. The fact that we have 70% of our teachers Hispanic, identifying Hispanic. So as I started to kind of unravel and think about like, so why might we struggle with inspiring students from here to pursue CS careers? Think about their role models in the classroom. Think about the very teachers who probably have the same stories that you are sharing about identity, insecurity, a little bit of doubt, not having access. So it's like, it's like you put one finger on a part of the pipeline you think you can fix, and then something else comes up, and then you're just kind of like, playing whack-a-mole trying to figure it out. One of the big crises, and let me answer the question. Well, let me share my screen real quick because I don't want to leave you hanging. I want to show you the definition that is actually used. I'd say one of the definitions that is used when we talk about computer science. So what is computer science? As the foundation for all computing, computer science is defined as the study of computers and algorithmic processes, as Victor alluded to in his first part of the definition, including their principles, their hardware, software design, the implementation of the software and hardware, and as Ariel even mentioned, the impact on society. So like this is the umbrella. But what happened, maybe, I don't know how many years this was, Vic could probably remember it, around when we introduced computer science, we really introduced it interchangeably as coding. So when we introduced, it was Chris Bosch, who was like, he was, if you remember, like maybe it was like 10 years ago, he was like, oh, I also programmed when I was in college. So I think what happened was we've been playing catch up since then, where we're trying to now deconstruct that computer science is not coding. It's so much more. It's design. It's the curation of music, as Beatriz was doing, right? It's the, being an entrepreneur. It's really, like I said, all of you here are here today because I see you as part of under that umbrella, where some people might not, because the definition has been, kind of just tied to coding. And so Beatriz, I want, especially for the crisis that we face with women and girls in particular, any thoughts as we're having this conversation now, please, Beatriz?
Well, the marketing side of me says, well, that's a branding problem and we need to fix that ASAP. So let's create a community forward campaign on what computer science is. And we can probably all tap into our networks and create a successful campaign.
Now you're looking into the future too.
So let me start by saying that. And before I answer your question, I want to start with a very personal anecdote as to why I never thought I would be the leader of a tech company. Even when Musicasa was born, it was never intended to be a tech company. In November 2019. When I was probably 6 or 7 years old, I was in the baseball team with my brother, and I was probably one of only 2 girls in a team of 15 people. As you can imagine now, I'm an athlete, I love sports. And we had won the game, and as a celebration, my dad took us to a pharmacy and gave us each $1 to buy whatever we wanted from the store for $1, right? And this is like 1996, so you could buy probably like 10 candies for $1. So we go to the pharmacy, and like I'm going around the store and I'm buying the candy, and I'm like, I have, one thing that I bought that was 99 cents. And then I see my brother, and my brother has 10 things that cost him $1. So we get in the car, and I'm now like fighting with my dad and my brother about the fact that he gave more money to my brother, and that he loves my brother more because he gave him more money. To what my dad starts explaining to me, no, it's just that you don't get it. He had the same amount of money that you have, but he decided to spend it in more things because they were less costly, and you decided to get the most costly thing. But at the moment that he said, no, it's that you don't get it, I disconnected from the lesson. So since I was 7 years old, I always thought that I was stupid and I didn't get math and numbers. Therefore, I couldn't pursue that path because the genius in my home and the numbers guy in my home was my brother, it wasn't me. To the point that I would get nervous going into math classes because I don't get it. And I would get A's in algebra and I would get A's, in pre-calculus, but I still wouldn't think that I was good enough because I had to study more to get it. To the point where I took geometry class in high school and in college, and I flunked twice on both classes because I just couldn't pass the mindset point of you are smart enough to learn what this is all about. And because of that, I was unable to maybe pursue tech from a very early stage in my career because I didn't think I was capable enough to be part of that. And I don't think that's a unique story. I think that's a story that's replicated over and over and over in many households. And maybe it's gender specific, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a country specific issue, right? Like Venezuelans have different barriers than Puerto Ricans have from a social culture resources perspective. So for like going back to your original question about me going to you and saying, hey, I'm not computer science, I'm all these other things, but not that. You educated me, and you're like, no, computer science is everything. And actually, everything that you've been doing for the past 10 years is computer science. It's just that there's a branding issue with how it is explained and why we run away. Like when I launched Musicasa and we decided to be a tech company, and I'll promise I'll be short with this. I called my brother and I said, hey, I need help with numbers. I need help with bringing the vision to a financial model. And I don't even know what a financial model is. Like I wouldn't apply to business school, and I wouldn't apply to a minor in business because I didn't think I would get over the finance and the economics and the accounting classes. So we started doing the financial model, and my brother is amazing at numbers. I'm not going to take that away from him. Like he built the financial model, and we're having a meeting with an investor, and I couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep up with the terms. I couldn't keep up with, and this is my business. This is not my brother's business. This is something that I'm building. And I called my brother and I'm like, I feel so ashamed and so guilty that I cannot even keep up with the terms that I need to know to run a business like this. what can I do? So he gave me access to his CFA account. And January, February, and March of this year, I took all accounting and all finance classes for me to finally get over the fact that I wasn't good enough. And now I don't need my brother to sit down with me in a table with an investor, because I can talk about churn and I can talk about lifetime value. But it took getting over that fear of not being good enough, and having other women mirror what I'm capable of, for me to be like, okay, I can talk finance, I can talk accounting, I can talk numbers. It might not be perfect. It might not be with all the acronyms and words and business acumen words that I need and dictionary, but I'm gonna sure as hell be on the table and know what we're talking about. So that's sort of like a very long anecdotal answer.
No,
Your
no, this was
question.
no, I really think that was powerful. I think we all had an aha moment as you were saying that, about the power of words, about the environments. I mean, I see it all the time in different schools, where even something like esports is 99% guys, and there's like one or two girls, and there's like they talk about the culture. And so there is a culture that we, just by the nature of its design, is exclusive, and it's hard to get into, which goes back to your branding point, to the rebranding, to kind of like the recreation of what this means. I would really love to hear from Ariel a little bit, because I think mindset is an important part, right? So each of you have a unique perspective on the mindset piece. Pedro working with founders, Victor having to work through his mindset, self-taught mostly, I would say, on the programming side, and then Ariel, like, starting a coding boot camp. And I had the privilege of being next to Ariel in Pipeline, however many years ago that was, when it was just launching and it was like a small school.
The glamorous side of it. You've seen
I mean,
the glamour.
and it's just, I think we talk about K-12, okay, kindergarten through high school and then college. You're seeing the workforce side. You're seeing the mostly a lot of the career changers. How do you see mindset influencing, or has that been a big barrier? Or what are your observations of mindset to students who transition to learning code for like the first time?
Yeah. So listen, I'll piggyback on this trend of sharing stories, and I'll share a brief one. When we first launched IronHack in Spain, we launched it in the most resource constrained way possible. We were two MBA graduates with a tremendous amount of debt. We launched an accelerator business in the most expensive accelerator, which is an MBA program. And we arrived in Spain for a number of reasons. The market was really interesting. And I met one of the ecosystem leaders at the time in Madrid. It was a very small ecosystem, who was interested in the idea of IronHack, but that person wanted to meet the founders behind IronHack. The person had a very traditional CS background. And when they heard that I didn't have a CS background nor an education background, and same thing for my co-founder, they were like, honestly, guys, with all due respect, I don't know what you guys are doing. Right. And I think, when you build something over 8 years, you're going to encounter many moments like that, right? And I think the name of the game is resilience, right? And activating that internal fire that gets someone from feeling defeated in a pitch conversation with an investor when being asked about EBITDA and revenue growth, right? And a couple months later is doing a CFA training, right? That's what we need to do, right? As entrepreneurs, as career changers. And I think part of the reason why we've been successful in training now, close to 10,000 people in 8 different countries with really transformational learning experiences, is because I can relate to career changers, in that I've been a career changer myself several times. I went through it's crazy how all your stories are quite in parallel with mine. The story of Victor getting to university and struggling with that first calculus class literally happened to me, right? When I got to university, I was top of my class in Puerto Rico with calculus, get to university, and I barely made it to like calculus 1, right? You know, that experience took all possibilities to be a STEM major, right? Just through one placement test. I could have done it, right? But it was morale crushing, soul crushing, right? But you know, I went through that experience, finished with the most liberal arts background possible. I studied government, and I had this fear that Beatriz faced in a business conversation, and I said, you know what? I studied liberal arts. It was great. It was fun. Now I need to find a way to get into finance and learn the inner workings of M&A, corporate finance, accounting, right? And at that time, it was really challenging to break into investment banking, right? With, you know, my okay GPA, but not top of class GPA. But I think that experience of failing in college, right, and struggling to break through in my first job, right, and then struggling again to pivot from being an investment banker and starting a technology education business in Spain, right, where my Spanish was a very different Spanish accent than the one they had, right? You know, I was flexing that muscle, right, over the years. And when I look at what's required, right, to build a company and to scale it and to lead, right, a lot of it is falling off the horse and getting back on it, right, and just going at it again the next day, right. And that's kind of my message to our students, right, who are in a very similar position. They're coming from backgrounds that are very different, as all you guys know, right? Many of them are first generation immigrants, right, who are kind of doing the double leap of navigating the culture, right, and the hard skills. Many of them didn't go to college, are coming from backgrounds that are not professional at all, right, or coming from hospitality service roles, right. So I think it's big believer that it's all about that mindset and activating that resilience to just go through walls.
And Aria, I will say this, you're hitting on something that's actually trending in like the K-12 educational landscape, which is around building more comfort with failure, giving students more opportunities to kind of go and work through that discomfort. So there is like some research now that we're doing, you know, to kind of like figure out how do we create that in the classroom. And just to share, I'm gonna let I know Pedro wanted to say something, but I want to share that the at least in edtech, right, there is a lot of research that shows folks who start edtech or socially let's just say edtech or like socially what's the word I'm looking for, like socially conscious enterprises tend to be people who have experienced it themselves. So you see in edtech a lot of founders that are Latinos, that are Black, because they often see themselves as like, I went through this and now I want to try to fix it. And there's a lot of high stakes where you can't afford to fail. Like growing up, failing means not getting the rent in on time. Growing up, failing meant literally getting kicked out. There was like this fear that was also based on, you know, circumstances. So yeah, we have to, it goes back to the marketing and the recalibration of failing. What does that mean? Pedro, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, so I'm a numbers guy. I think we all gave like really interesting anecdotal stories that it's easy for someone to like be like, oh, that was her scenario, that's really sad. Oh, that was Victor, that's really sad. Oh, Ariel, okay, whatever. But so I long time ago, I wrote Web Analytics for Dummies. I'm very much about like, what does the data tell us, right? And so while you were talking, hopefully I didn't look like I wasn't paying attention, because I was, but I was also trying to like look up a research report. Is it okay if I share my screen for like a second? Okay, so I wanted to share like a slide that we created when I launched Navigate, which is my accelerator now. And one of the big things that struck me and why I got into mentoring when I did is, I believe, startups, when you look at like the American landscape and the impact we've had, startups are a big part of that. And it was what I saw as, coming from my background, I spent a lot of years building a small business, right? And I could have spent that same number of years, I got to see like other people who were 27 at the same age as I was at the time, or 30, having like hundreds of $1 million companies, and I was still building my little thing. And I was like, I don't get it. What did I do wrong? Or what did I do different? And when I started to look at the data, and this is 2016, but I'll show you the updated one. This is immigrant entrepreneurs that have launched $1 billion startups, right? The Hispanic population, Latinx founders are the #1 immigrant population in the United States, and we don't appear anywhere here. There's nobody here from Venezuela, from Brazil, from Guatemala, from Ecuador. You see India, Canada, UK, Israel, and this is a little bit old. So while we were talking, I wanted to look at updated. I know there are some today, right? 2021, we do have some unicorns founded by Hispanic founders, but I couldn't find like the numbers. And this is still, as of 2018, I didn't get a chance to really look at this really closely, but I don't think there's a single Latin country in this list as of 2018. As of 2021, I think there are some. I think one from Brazil, maybe Brex. I think their founders are Brazilian. So there are a few now, but this is 4 years ago. There was not a single Latin founder of $1 billion company as of 2018. And so from a data perspective, it's not just our individual experiences. There actually is statistical like proof that something about our experience is keeping us from breaking through, or has kept us from kind of breaking through those barriers in a more meaningful way. Now, I think a lot has changed in the last 4 years, and the conversation certainly has become more important. And now there is this focus. But even like when all the conversations about funding came out, and it was like minority founders get less than 2% of all venture capital, it's almost laughable how sad that is. Like, how can it be that 98% of dollars go to white male founders? It's crazy. It's insane. And a lot of that, so my little way of helping was, and Beatriz kind of spoke to this, is like, how do we educate people on that language, right? How do we teach people, okay, here's the language that they expect you to speak. And it goes to not just our pronunciation or our command of the English language, because Carlos, you and I both grew up here. We both grew up in New York, and we have very good vocabulary, and we don't have a noticeable accent of anything, but we still weren't speaking the language that these, the typical like networked Harvard white, grew up with a family that was very connected, people spoke. And so that became my mission when I launched Navigate, was how do I open this up to everybody? And it's only a very small part, because it still doesn't overcome that like childhood thing that we feel like Beatrice mentioned, where we have that limitation of like, I don't think I can do that because I feel like, something in my past. A lot of times it's actually really great that you can identify that, because oftentimes we can identify it. We just know that we don't feel like we're doing
a lot of work, lots and lots of internal work. Yes.
And it's a big part of just learning to speak the language that they speak that keeps us out of those conversations. And I say it's because we didn't grow up with, or I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I think especially the people who are not like, even though Carlos, you and I both grew up in New York, we were still probably first, I was first generation. I think you might have been first generation here in the States. It's not the same that when your grandfather and your great grandfather grew up here and they went to college here and they have a professional degree here and they're doctors and they're lawyers and they're doing all these things. My like biggest example of like a business owner, which I give him a ton of credit because it sparked my entrepreneurial path, but it was one of my uncles who had a lawn company. And I was like, oh, cool. He gets to do what he wants and he doesn't have a boss. But again, it wasn't a scalable business. It wasn't like a multi-million-dollar operation. And not being able to see that when we grew up has a massive impact in what we think we can do, or what we even understand that we can do. We might think we're hustling, and we think, and we are, and we're passionate, and we are, but it's like those small little tweaks that mean the difference between building a $2 million company and a $200 million company that nobody taught us growing up and we didn't grow up with. So from an anecdotal perspective, it's true. From a statistical perspective, it's true. There is still like this barrier that the Latinx, community in the United States is trying to break through. And like I said, I know we've made a little bit of progress in these last couple of years, but that's where forums like this need to continue happening, because people need to know that there is support when you don't think you have that language down. And even when you think you're building, still reach out and try to figure out ways you can plug in and build your network, so that as the largest minority, community in the United States, our numbers should be much higher in these types of reports.
So, Victor, I know that you want to say something, but I just want to piggyback on something that Pedro said. When I was in advertising and marketing 10 years ago, it was my first gig, fresh out of college. And I learned that global brands were adopting this term total market approach. And what total market approach meant was that everything they did for the general market had to be adapted to the Hispanic market, to the African American market, to the Asian market. So there wasn't any originality, there wasn't any human insight, there wasn't any country-specific insight driving the decisions for how communication planning, how media planning, how channel planning would apply to that specific segment. So what they started seeing is that they would stall in sales within the Hispanic market or the African American because they weren't speaking to them. They weren't being represented in campaigns. They weren't being represented through ambassadors and influencers that represented what Ariel and Victor and Carlos and Pedro and Bea grew up with. So the total market approach was trying to whitewash Puerto Rican culture, El Salvador culture, Guatemala culture, in a way that would save money to the big corporations, but then would minimize the importance of being Latino or being Asian or being African. So when you're not seeing yourself mirrored in media, which is, Latinos are consumerists, and we are one of the top segments to consume media at all levels. It's really hard to see yourself become a CEO. It's really hard to become, the CTO of a big company. And once they start moving away from the total market approach, because they find out that numbers are not adding up, and they start working with campaigns and people like Bad Bunny and Daddy Yankee and Taylors of the world, which is a whole other conversation, you start understanding that capacity of influence we have at a cultural level. So if we have the capacity of influence at a cultural level, what are the capacity of influences we have at a technology level? We've never thought about that. And the implications that the next 30 years will have on an industry or a discipline like computer science, because it means everything. So it means everyone.
I'll turn it over to Vic. Vic, you can share your thoughts on what was said, but also if you could share, since we're cutting close on time, we're going to jump into the future, and I'm giving you all like a magic wand. What no limits, no money limits, no limits on decisions, on operations, on anything. In your opinion, what can we do to impact some of the crises we talked about in terms of representation in CS and that landscape?
Yeah, so I think the representation issue is very complex, because it's sort of like a chicken and an egg problem, right? Because there's so few founders and CTOs who are Hispanic, then that you don't see yourself in that role, and then there's fewer founders and CTOs that are Hispanic. So it's a difficult thing to tackle. I certainly seen it. When I worked at Amazon, I interviewed something like 70 something engineers, not a single Hispanic one even applied. So like they're not even really applying. and it's tough, right? I think that one of the things that we're doing really wrong, that if I could wave a magic wand and fix it, is I would love for there to be more resources that are kind of like magic wand again, right? Prestigious, like people treat them like as reputably as they treat like a Harvard or Penn or whatever, and teach you the actual things that you need to know to be a tech entrepreneur. Because there's a bunch of, it's not only the finance, right? So first of all, props Beatriz, because like starting to take a CFA class to pick out the things that you need is a very admirable step, right? There was a bunch of BS there that you didn't need, right? Like I'm sure you did not study the chapter about how to value corporate bonds, right? And you do have to study that to pass the CFA, right? So the educational system is a bunch of like BS, like a lot of times it's hyper specialized, right? And there's way too much BS, that too many hoops to jump through to actually get that CFA. And then it's super discouraging because what do you do with that? It's just a piece of paper. It still doesn't get you opportunities, right? So there needs to be resources that are like that teach you the actual important things. Like, what do you need to know about finance to own a startup? What do you need to know about tech to change a mindset from having like a pool servicing company or an electrician company to having something actually scalable? What are the new concepts that you need to learn? And that's it. And so if I could wave a magic wand, there would be a college that teaches these things, and it would have great reputation, and people wouldn't treat it like it's secondhand education.
All right. Pedro, what about you? You got the magic wand. How would you use it?
Okay. I actually love that, Victor, and I'm sure we have Josue from Virtual Learning Academy, who is actually rebranding as Virtual Learning of America, because they want to start to build that. It's actually technology courses hosted in English or Spanish, live courses, again, like more things like this that get respected on a resume, I think would be really important. But I think if I had to wave a magic wand, I think, again, making more access to mentors and advisors that can not only be part of your education, because I think education is a really important part of it, but be there with you as you grow, so that you can continue to learn and continue to and again, it comes down to our networks, right? I think when somebody has, I kind of alluded to, someone whose family grew up here and they've got generations and generations of family that's networked, the benefits you get from like having an uncle that works here or a cousin that works there, or having a question being, oh, let me ask my grandfather how he dealt with that when he had his, but like those opportunities go beyond like standard traditional education. And I think more programs like that, where you can connect with people, it's like big brother, big sister, but into adulthood, right? Like we're adults, we still need that support. We still need that network. And when we don't have it, a long time, and even today, I probably say like, I don't have like a mentor that I can reach out to. There's nobody who I know who's like maybe a little older than me or a little more accomplished that I have that relationship with. And it holds me back even to this day, not having those resources. I think, having more of those opportunities would be really interesting.
Ariel, and then Beatriz.
Yeah, complex challenge, right? As Victor mentioned. So I wish I could wave the wand a couple times, right? But I'll use it on turning Bad Bunny into a computer scientist who builds a tremendously successful company that then IPOs, and he makes more money from that than he does from reggaeton albums. And Ricky Martin will do a career change into VC growth equity investor, right? And he's gonna make. And listen, it's silly, but it's not, right? Because if you look at the leaders in the community that we have, right, which I tremendously appreciate, and they do an awesome job of waving the Puerto Rican flag high, right, every time they go on stage. But if you think of sports, music, it's a very narrow funnel of success, right? And a lot of the kids from our communities only relate and aspire to that, right? So I think we need to put more role models, right, in technology and CS that they can identify and be encouraged by. And I think those two with a hand wave would do us a great service.
It fits into that rebrand strategy, right? Bad Bunny, just like in the video, instead of on the beach for Corona, he's, you know, hacking away for Iron Hack. Like, oh, I just finished my Iron Hack boot camp, right?
You're gonna have to change the lyrics a little bit. I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's replicating how he's hacked culture into the computer science world. That's what he's done. He's taking us back to the 90s just by being authentic. So I love that you said that, because if I had a wand, I had two approaches that I wanted to touch upon, and one of those was yours. We need more people on top, money-making decisions that can drive us forward. But I'm not going to use it for that, because Ariel is already creating some magic with that. I'm going to use it for opening access to mental health, quite honestly. And hear me out. As Latinos and as Latinas, we come from households with a lot of limitations. Call it limitations on resources, call it on limitations of being colonized, call it on limitations of how government works in certain countries. And I don't want to politicize this at all. But what I'm trying to bring to the table is a lot of the things that I experienced were self-limiting beliefs, were stuff that I wasn't guided through from a very early stage, right? And if we were to give people access to asking the right questions very early on in their lives to understand who they are, what they like, what they can bring to the table, what the world needs, we would have a faster understanding as to what it is that we can bring to the world in terms of being of service. And that will delineate a lot of the stuff that we can pursue, regardless of the resources or education we get from a typical public or private school. Because these things are not being implemented in school, right? Meditation, it's now starting to be respected as a way to like go inward and listen to your inner voice for guidance. So for me is, if we can teach resilience, if we can teach failure, if we can teach how to reframe certain limiting beliefs, that's the biggest asset anyone needs to believe in themselves. And the difference between entering computer science or not entering computer science, I really believe it's a confidence thing. It's a mindset thing. So if Latinos have the money, like I was calculating how much I've spent on my coach in the past 3 years, and it's more than $4,000. More than without it being able to go through the health insurance. We don't have, not everyone has that capacity. I've been in a really dark period in life financially, and I still prioritize my mental health coach versus food. So if we can give that access, I feel like Latinos don't have access to mental health resources and capabilities. So if we were to do that and give it to them early on, we would, accelerate the process in which we are able to face certain challenges and see through opportunities to really pursue what we want to do in life. And that is, at this point, anything we want. So that's the idealist in me. And I think mental health is one of the biggest what's the word? It deteriorates the person to really pursue what they want in life.
As someone who's been meditating the past 3 years, I can totally attest to that. I think that there's a piece of that you mentioned around the total market approach, right? Like where that gets applied, like the dominant culture is kind of applied as like, okay, we don't face that, so why we don't know that our students are facing it, because the people who are kind of creating that culture aren't aware of what those challenges are. So it's a chicken and egg thing. But we've reached our time. I want to thank all of you for joining tonight. This recording is going to be available gonna like do some campaigns on it. We're gonna meet again as we look at the future. So we are starting a Latinos for Computer Science campaign. I just got the logo submitted and everything. So it is gonna be a thing that we're working on, and I'm gonna reach out to each of you to hopefully be a part of like an advisory council for it. And maybe Bea could reach out to Bad Bunny and see if he's.
No, I was gonna say Ariel needs to reach out to Bad Bunny.
He's on speed dial. He's on speed dial. So